Okay, so today, December 17th, 2021, we'll pay homage to two architects. We start with KILIAN IGNAZ Dientzenhofer, who was born in 1689 and died in 1751. So KILIAN IGNAZ Dientzenhofer, he died actually on the 18th. You know, I said we pay homage because tomorrow there will be another presentation and an important and large one, ample one. I decided to talk about these two people today. So KILIAN IGNAZ Dientzenhofer was a Bohemian architect of the Baroque era. He was the fifth son of the German architect Christoph Dientzenhofer and the Bohemian German ethnics Maria Anna Nelang. Anyway, the widow of the architect Johann Georg Jesus. This is quite a detailed explanation, and the member of the well-known Dientzenhofer family of architects. So KILIAN, who died on the 18th of December, today we are on the 17th, but we pay homage to him today. As an architect, he cooperated with his father and with Jan Santini Icarch. Among Dientzenhofer's buildings are the Church of St. John of Nepomuk, the St. Nicholas Church, and the Vila Amerika and Kinsky Palace in Prague. He also built numerous churches and secular buildings in other towns of Bohemia. Many of his later projects were realized by his pupil and son-in-law, Anselmo Martino Lurago. So apparently this was the man, but engravings are often not quite accurate, and they are not made during the time when the certain person who is depicted lived. Anyway, let's assume he looked kind of like this. And now let's look at some of his works. He is a well-known architect. He built in Prague some important buildings, works in Prague. Vila Amerika from 1717 to 1720, so, 300 years ago. Nowadays, Antonín Dvořák Museum. Baroque architecture, a house built for I don't know if it was, I don't know why it was called Vila Amerika, but today it houses the museum for the Dvořák, the great composer. So, what can we say? Indeed, Baroque architecture, an architecture which doesn't say no or didn't say no to ornament, something we still have troubles to come to terms with. I think ornament is important if it's not excessive, but even if it is excessive, like in Rococo architecture, it might not please the minimalist, but it pleases the one who likes excess, like Oscar Wilde, who said moderation is a fatal thing, excess always succeeds. I don't know, the minimalist would say nonsense. Anyway, I like this older picture of the building. Somehow it looks more, authentical and more ornate, and the passage of time and so on. It looks like a building that would stir up one's curiosity. At that time, maybe it was called Vila Amerika. I still wonder why it is called or was called Vila Amerika. The ceiling, what can we say? It's like in a church. But then similar ceilings are also, or similar ceiling can be found in Palladios villas and many other buildings of the past. Something we don't do any longer, but that's maybe because our relationship with the above became quite prosaic lately. Now, monastery, convent of Benedictine monastery in Břevnov, about 1717, and it's almost like a fortress. It does have windows, but there is a certain solidity and rigidity which would make it qualify for what I just said, a fortress. And this part of the building even more so, although it's more modest in scale, in a very picturesque landscape. Well, what can we say? 300 years ago, now a church in this place, which I would rather not try to pronounce right now, St. John Nepomuc Church, again, from 300 years ago. I mean, there are so many churches, and some of them are splendid, maybe more are, almost splendid. It's hard to evaluate them using the perceptions of today, because today we have a very different form of aesthetics, and how do you evaluate this building, if it's a good building or a bad building, or it is impressive, it could be impressive, especially inside, but almost any building 300 years old, if not 500 or 700 and so on, is to an extent impressive because of the age. But here is more than just the age. It's, you can admire the harmony, the forms, the paintings, the volumes, the space. Anyway. Redesign of San Loreta in this place, 1723. Now, was there more affluence at that time? I mean, could we say that the Baroque came into being when society was more opulent? I'm not sure about that. It's possible that it's not so. That it's just a certain disponibility for a certain kind of architecture, depending on many factors. And I don't know. I mean, there are very rich people today who build minimalist buildings for themselves. I mean, with the help of an architect. So minimalism is not an expression of lack of funds. Often, sophisticated minimalist buildings are actually very expensive and employ the services of very, famous architects. I am not trying to say that the Baroque was born on sheer poverty, but who knows anyway. Plus, such buildings were not built for everybody. The Baroque residence of Church St. Thomas in Malá Strana, again, around 300 years ago. Quite impressive interior. I mean, it doesn't matter in what age you live. This kind of interior cannot leave you indifferent. But it is a church. It's not a dormitory for students or a block of flats with studios for unmarried people. It's a church, the house of God. Another villa from 1725. A house by two turtle doves, a funny name, a house by two turtle doves from 1726. I wonder where the name comes from. So this one as well, about 300 years ago. Now the Church of St. John Nepomuc, 1730, 1739, I have no picture. St. Bartholomew Church in the Old Town, 1731, no picture. Sorry, St. Nicholas Church on Old Town Square from 290 years ago or so. How unreal seems that moon on the sky. So this is the church built by this architect. Here it is again during the day. Prague. It's a city with a very significant old town, and the buildings are very well kept. And so it was not damaged fatally like other cities during the Second World War. It's a chance it had, and we can appreciate the riches of Prague. They also had the very interesting emperor, Rudolf II, who was an intellectual and admirer of arts, and even esoteric arts, if we can call them so. He brought to his court, Kepler, Johannes Kepler, and Arcimboldo, the great artist, alchemists. He was a very special man. Anyway, but look at this architecture. It's not something to ignore, far from it. Quite impressive. Another church from about the same time, a little bit later. A palace, and the palace it is. I would say a fine building and well kept, this one as well. About 300 years old. KILIAN IGNAZ. His family name I still hesitate to pronounce, but the first two are okay, kind of easy to pronounce. KILIAN IGNAZ. Prague. Another palace, Piccolomini. A different kind. This is from a rendering, a project, I think. I'm not sure. It looks like maybe the architects who proposed something here, something funny in the sense that you know, modernistically engaging. But this is the building by him, more austere. And outside of Prague, let's see what the All Saints Church in Heřmánkovice, 1722, 1726. I like these pictures. They are very, you know, artistic, so to speak, in black and white, or so I perceive them. And in Karlovy Vary, St. Magdalena Church, but no picture. Sorry, St. Laurent Church in Chodov. Here it is on a hill, man and God, the building of man and the trees of God or of nature. And now a castle, he built a castle, but no picture. Church of St. Clement in Odolena Voda. I'm curious, how was life then, you know, almost 300 years ago? Another monastery, no pictures, Cistercian Monastery, classy, 1739. Sorry, some, you know, some information I couldn't find, but who knows, maybe I didn't investigate hard enough. And that's it. A rather short presentation. And let's go to the second one today, about an interesting North American architect who worked with Frank Lloyd Wright, and he became an original architect. I appreciate him. I don't know a lot about him, but let's see what he did. Byrne. I checked the spelling. Is not the spelling. The pronunciation is a little bit difficult for his family name. Byrne, kind of like burned, almost like Byrne, B-U-R-N-E-T or B-U-R-N-T. So Francis Byrne, born on the 19th of December, so 2 days from now, but in 1883, and died on the 18th of December, 1967, 1 day from now, was a member of the group of architects known as the Prairie School, associated with Wright. After the demise of the Prairie School, or demise of the Prairie School, about 1914 to 1916, Byrne continued as a successful architect by developing his own style. Here he is, or was. I think his only training in architecture was in the office of Frank Lloyd Wright. Yeah, he was an apprentice, and he started an apprenticeship there. And then after a while he left. I know another collaborator of Frank Lloyd Wright left to, I'm talking about Griffin and his wife. They left the office of Frank Lloyd Wright, and he asked him, Griffin asked him to take care of his architecture office in Chicago. And Barry Byrne, he took care of that office. Then, you know, he moved to various places and opened his office, but he did some interesting works. And I think he was an interesting man. He was, almost, self-educated. I mean, he worked in the office of Wright, and that's where he learned about architecture. The architecture of Byrne, taking the Prairie School to Europe. Let's see what he did. The Charles Clark House in Seattle, a very sensitive drawing, I would say, in pencil. It's almost like a sketch, but it has dimensions, and it is sensitively done. Clearly, he had sensitivity in his drawing, and not just in his drawings. We are going to see two churches, at least, very interesting, I think, by him. So here the work is very similar to the one by Griffin and to the one by Frank Lloyd Wright. So it took him some time to become so-called original. Sorry about the resolution of these pictures. Now the Frederick Hanshai's house in Seattle from 1910. No, the house Seattle in Washington, actually. I don't know why. No, it's in Seattle. I don't know exactly. I don't have pictures, and I regret. Now we arrive at a very important and interesting work, the Church of Christ the King in Ireland. He built it in Ireland, and I think it's a good work, and very different from the works of Frank Lloyd Wright. So obviously he was able to emancipate himself from the, from the master, so to speak. I like this church. Both the inside and the outside, this is serious architecture done sensitively. Very Byrne. Now, what we read that bringing the prairie style to Europe, this is not really prairie style. It's not, because the prairie style advocated horizontality, and this is something else altogether. This is very Byrne. I don't know who was in charge of the sculptural work, but I think it's well chosen and well placed. For God the King. Even the drawings are good. The project itself is graphically convincing, and there seems to be nothing wrong with this building, if I am to use such a way of putting it. In a way, a deformed or squeezed octagon, the plan. It's an interesting church. Now another church, this one in Kansas City in Missouri, Church of St. Francis Xavier, somehow different from the previous one. So again, the modernity of Byrne is very different from the one by Frank Lloyd Wright. He built, but I don't think I included it in this presentation. I discovered just today some information, a block of flats, an apartment building in Chicago. Quite interesting. I mean, very austere and simple, but with again with the modernity which out nothing to Frank Lloyd Wright, just like these buildings. Apparently, and now I remember, he worked on important projects for Frank Lloyd Wright, on Unity Temple and another work which I do not recall now, but on Unity Temple I was thinking of it because you know, this is a church, but his architecture is personal, is his. I don't think he is indebted to Wright to this kind of building. And there is a certain almost expressionism here that is rather surprising, considering we are talking about the United States, which didn't have an expressionist architecture. Charles Eames, also before he became the modernist, the famous modernist, he built by himself, before he met his second wife. He built two churches, also I think in Arkansas, also with touches of expressionism, a moderate expressionism. But here we see an interesting architectural work by this architect who is not well known, at least in this part of the world, but I think he deserves some attention. I guess this was built also for the same king, for God. And but in this rigid way of at least of this photograph is telling us that in this rigidity, the archetypal, the ur phenomenon of the creator of the world is quite well and emphasized, I would say. But it's something, you almost see a duality. He's not just the cross, but he's also the king here, if we have to call God in this way. It's interesting in a way. Also, rather unique, the choice of colors. I don't know if these are the original colors. The artworks themselves, the frescoes, they are original creations. They don't mimic or copy anything that preceded them. And again, it shows this building is a creation, and we can salute it for this with affection and appreciation. Another church in St. Paul, Minnesota. This one also is in my opinion, is almost more modern than certainly than some churches of his master, Frank Lloyd Wright. Frank Lloyd Wright, I think, built 10 or 11 so-called sacred buildings, 10 churches and 1 synagogue. Or so he was asked, Frank Lloyd Wright was asked in an interview, do you believe in God? And he said, I do, but I spell it nature. But here, the level of abstraction and cubistic disposition is high in the case of Byrne. Another one from Racine, Wisconsin, 1924. Here he, sent, discreet but still, noticeable clin d'oeil towards the Gothic, but abstracted and with a certain gracefulness brought to his time. When was it built? 1924, so almost 100 years ago. This one is interesting too, in his own way, in its own way. He was an original architect who had something to say, obviously. And I think he deserves more attention, including from myself. And God willing, I will amplify this presentation by next year. Another one in South Dakota, Church of the Saints Peter and Paul in Pierre, South Dakota. I mean, really, through such buildings, he proves to be almost a more radical architect than Wright. I mean, this is thoroughly modern or modernistic. It's austerity. That's it. So he was born on the 18th of December, not this year, of course, and he died on the no, the other way around. He was born on the 19th of December and died on the 18th. So with 1 day in advance, anticipating, we wish him a happy birthday. Thank you.